The Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission gets lined up. Recommended changes for one of Indiana's largest school districts, and candidates begin to announce plans ahead of the 2026 elections. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending December 19th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
Governor Mike Braun picked 3 new members of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports the agency decides whether a utility can charge its customers for the cost of things like new power plants and lines.
Kerwin Olson is with the consumer and environmental advocacy group Citizens Action Coalition. He says it's fairly pleased with the appointments, particularly Commissioner Anthony Swinger, who once worked for the state agency that represents ratepayers. Though state lawmakers have limited the IURC's power in the past decade or so, Olson hopes the agency will do more to make energy affordable for Hoosiers.
Under this umbrella, if you will, of the affordability crisis facing consumers today, that we'll see these new commissioners recognize the authority and the powers that they do possess.
The commission's new chairman will be Republican Senator Andy Zay. He's served on the Senate Utilities Committee for years, and Olson says tends to favor energy sources like coal.
Is part of the solution to curb Indiana's energy concerns? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney. Republican Mike O'Brien. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers. And Ebony Chappel, Director of Brand and Community Strategy at Free Press Indiana. I'm Jill Sheridan, Managing Editor at WFYI. So, Mike, are these appointments good for the commission? Are they going to be able to address some of the energy concerns that Hoosiers are having every day?
I think they certainly serve and fit what the governor's campaigned on and what he's done while in office, even, over the summer, rejecting AES's proposed rate increase and shrinking that. And they have it. And these 3 new members do have a history of being critical of rate increases and things like that. Andrew being on the OUCC and kind of blending the line between the IURC and the OUCC is interesting. The OUCC, of course, is like supposed to be the counterbalance, but it's always, the criticism from the governor and others was always that it wasn't quite equal, right, between those two agencies. So yeah, I think this certainly serves what he's always said. I think the trick is, so for people grinding over their electricity bills and concerned about it, I get it. It's also a major driver in inflation. But you wind up operating, it's like healthcare, it's like health insurance, right? It's like you wind up operating in these like negative policy spaces where you go, oh, it didn't go up as much as it would have, because it still does have to go up, because this has to be balanced against the other priority of the governor and the legislature, which is to put an emphasis on the increasing capacity and generation. And that requires building out infrastructure, and there's an expense to that. Now, should it be the expense that it's been is the rub, it's the debate, but it will be an increase if we're successful in the state of creating policies that increase generation for economic development and all the other things that we know that we're going to need in the future, which the governor's been very focused on. So it's a balance between, cutting rates or not allowing for energy companies to go build out capacity and recognizing the state needs those companies to go do that.
I mean, and it is a bit of a crisis. I mean, Indiana needs more energy, and lawmakers
Which is why the governor should have spoken out when the senator from Missouri stopped the lines coming from Kansas with all the wind-driven and solar-driven power we could have gotten more cheaply. Fine, he's trying to deliver on some of his promises. The problem from my perspective on this is that this whole system of regulation of utilities was set up when the utilities were Indiana utilities, run by Indiana companies and basically dependent on coal. That's all changed, all right? Coal is not coming back despite the Republicans. And AES is owned by some company from Brazil, and we're getting our natural gas out of Texas. And we're really not in a position, like the same thing, the analogy you drew with healthcare, we're really not in a position to affect that in a very substantial way because we're a small player in this whole thing. I mean, maybe if we had regional cooperation in the Midwest to try to negotiate more favorable terms and all, and maybe if we had cooperation on bringing in when we have cheap utility or cheap electricity available, we could make a real difference. It is a problem. It's a problem that's been festering since we've stopped being coal dependent and we've stopped having Indiana companies regulate or actually provide the electricity. So we've got to do something different, and that means a little bit more thinking outside the box, not just replacing some people on the existing commission.
So lawmakers, Ebony, are proposing, solar and wind solutions, which Indiana has, jumped on somewhat, but these sort of low-hanging fruit solutions, is that where we should be looking at in the interim as we do try to close this gap?
I think that this is a step in the direction of closing that gap and having people on this commission that are speaking on behalf of Hoosiers. I know one of those appointments is Bob Deeg out of Southern Indiana, and that is a choice that was championed by Representative Alex Burton, again, out of Evansville, because just like in Indianapolis where I live, people down there are experiencing utility rate hikes. The costs are just becoming exorbitant and difficult to keep up with. So to Ann's point, there is a lot that could be done to help diversify our sources of energy generation. But in the meantime, I do think that this is a step in the right direction for Hoosiers.
Well, I mean, we've heard the governor as well, encourage this new commission to, look at all options, and especially, we've talked a lot about data centers, but considering, the types of energy usage that these larger projects, we've heard, from about supercomputers coming out of Lilly, and heard that we need, these. This is the future. This is going to happen, and we've got to have the energy to back it up.
We can't just ride out the storm and say, well, we're going to go back to our old energy usage at some point. Yeah. I mean, this is a global problem. I was going to say national, but it really is a global problem, not stating anything that people aren't painfully aware. In terms of the increasing demand, in terms of the pressure on the grid, the existing grid, which in some ways maybe isn't capable in all parts of the country of transmitting the kind of power that's necessary just to move from point A to point B. And then you look at the cost. It doesn't help to tell Hoosiers that if you just look at the numbers, we're still paying less than some of the states around us. But that's like it was with that's like property the rate if you just look at the straight rate, but it's like property taxes. We had low, they went high. We used to have the lowest energy cost in the country. So any increase is going to catch people's attention and be rather unpleasant when they open those bills. This certainly helps, I think. But the regulatory change is just part of the lineup, the membership roster, probably only part of the issue. You talk about increasing new sources of energy, and probably we'll see yet again revisited this notion of who has authority over where these facilities can be, and not only the production, whether it's a solar array or a collection of turbines, but then the transmission lines, to your point earlier. Right now, we're one of the states that doesn't have any state authority or state guidelines, so a single municipality or county can hold up a project. So I think we've seen action on that front in the legislature in the past. I think we'll see it again. I think it maybe has even passed one chamber, but not both houses. That's part of it. We saw a white paper put forth by consumer groups and conservation groups saying, we got to look at data centers, we got to look at discounts in the short term for people who have limited incomes, lots of things that maybe are short-term solutions or would be more readily addressed than something that goes before the commission, which by definition unfolds slowly.
We could also stop giving such incentives to data centers to come to Indiana.
Which, again, is that balance.
Because we still have the highest average residential electric bill in the Midwest.
Or if they come, getting them to pay heavier portion of the freight.
Rather than paying to bring them here,
Well, Mike, the commission also is in charge of figuring out how electric bills are calculated. Like, is it sticker shock for Hoosiers? Would that help to, see some different numbers?
Well, I think that's the goal. I mean, I think that's what the governor's goal is. It was on property tax reform, on other things that are hitting pocketbooks. So
yeah. Well, we hope this works better than his property tax reform bill, which is hurting everybody.
And part of it is acknowledging the problem. I mean, the malpractice politically would be for a governor to say,
affordability.
If you were to say that you're wrong, you don't need to believe your lying eyes or your when you open that envelope. Trust me, the rates aren't. He's acknowledging it, which is step one.
And that never goes over too well, does it?
Well, it's better than ignoring the problem.
Also this week, earlier this year, state lawmakers mandated a task force led by Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett to find ways for Indianapolis Public Schools and the city charter schools to collaborate. Many have raised concerns the elected IPS school board will lose power. Eric Weddle reports a final recommendation was made this week.
The vote to create a new Indianapolis Education Corporation passed 8-1. It would oversee transportation, enrollment, and building use for Indianapolis Public Schools and all city charter schools. IPS Superintendent Alicia Johnson voted for the plan. She admits the proposal has flaws, but says the status quo isn't working.
The proposal tonight is an imperfect solution for a challenging set of realities. The reality is that we have too many schools within our boundary, which strains resources and creates uneven access to opportunities.
State lawmakers will have the final say. They are expected to take up the issue next month.
So, Ann, all this stems from the charter school debate last year at the State House. Is this possible that other, districts might be able to benefit from this type of change?
It's possible. My understanding is that this commission would have the responsibility over the transportation and the facilities. Yes. And that part is good. And it also seems to me it gives them the opportunity to see how the charter schools are spending their money, which is something we haven't been privy to, even though it's tax money. Mm-hmm. We don't know about, and you've heard anecdotally superintendents and school districts being paid $250,000 with charter school money. So, if that's what it does, that's a good thing. And if it doesn't take power from the elected IPS school board to regulate what teachers are paid and what qualifications they have and assess how the students are doing, that could take the curriculum, too, certainly. That would take a lot off their plate because there's so much to do managing, just even moving those kids from one place to another. Right. So there are opportunities there for, it seems to me, not just savings but accountability and letting the elected school board focus on the things that are most important in education in Indianapolis. So it could be positive.
I mean, Mike, so lawmakers are going to have to bring this up, or going to try to bring this up during this extremely short session that we're going to be looking at. What type of translation might you think would happen with legislation like this?
Well, one, I know this is controversial in some parts of the community. First of all, we represent IPS at our firm, so I worked a lot on the legislation and the effort over the summer along with a colleague of mine, Grant Krebda. And so it's important to remember for the people that were so critical the other night. Where we started a year ago was the legislature came in and said, we're taking over IPS.
Yes.
Not only are we taking over IPS, but you're sharing your referendum money with the charters. Right. That's where we started. And so to end at, there is now a Democrat mayor who is in charge of this commission that is going to oversee the things that Ann just described and get that off the plate of the school board. That there was another DeLaney this week who said publicly that the reason he never ran for school board is because he didn't want to be in the bus business.
and so, sounds like my husband.
Yeah, right?
and that's the school. In order for IPS and the charters to coexist, and for the charters to get better, by the way, and make sure that the best actors are the ones that are operating, this was an important step. It gives IPS control. It gives the mayor and the city control over these logistics and assets that are in the system already. Figure out a way to make them work more efficiently with the dollars that they have, and expand more for the things that the school board's doing, and save more for the things the school board's doing, which is expanding programming and paying teachers and doing all those important things too.
Well, I mean, we did see such a passionate meeting there this week at the city-county building. The people that are really upset that the board will lose some control, do they have valid concern?
I think they do have valid concerns. It's telling that the one no vote on this from the ILEA side is a IPS parent and teacher as well. So I think it is telling. I think anytime we're talking about what may possibly happen with the power that the IPS school board has, it drives passion. This has been a conversation that has been going on for a really long time. When you think about different groups who have had a vested interest in electing members of that school board and running those campaigns, and what parents and students and teachers, what they interpret that to look like, it creates a very passionate environment. But to the point that Mike made about making sure that there is some more accountability over charters, I think this plan, although it is not perfect, as one of the ILEA members mentioned, this is not a perfect plan. Yes, I voted for it, but I know that it is imperfect. Being able to reduce the number of authorizers, I think, is really important, and putting IPS in a position to be able to do that. Also, to the building point, getting rid of that $1 rule, where at one point IPS would be mandated by the state to release buildings to charter schools for $1. I don't think anybody ever thought that that made any sense, unless, of course, you're running a charter school and you just got this fantastic, you got this fantastic deal. So, you know, overall, I think that it has a lot of potential to do great things, having a unified and a collaborative effort across the board, but it is something that without levels of accountability, checking, making sure that people are doing what it is that they said they were going to do, this could go a different way, especially when we think about who is appointed to that board of overseeing. So being very careful about how that's handled.
It's also going to be interesting to see how this interacts with partisan elected school boards, too.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, should this sort of be a pilot program for possible, they've been talking about possible rural districts that might
I don't know
be
if
able
it should
to
be. It will. I think it probably will be a de facto pilot program if this does make some of the advances that have been discussed here. And also maybe as a way to address, I think some public schools have felt, maybe with legitimately in some cases, that there's been this sort of assumption that everything they're doing and have been doing is wrong. You know, that somehow the public schools in our state have failed us, and we're going to put up as many impediments to them, whether it's the $1 building transfer, whether it's sharing the revenue from levies, vouchers. Whether it's vouchers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seemed like, okay, we just assume you stink, so we're going to do everything to prove our point. If, in fact, this does provide, the cliche, the level playing field, so you can see the accountability of the charters and the traditional public schools, and maybe it erases some of those, is a vent to some of that hostility, all the better. And he had his disclosure, that you represent them. I was a product of IPS, kindergarten through 8th grade. Don't hold that against IPS, though.
We certainly will not.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
A few years. It's now time for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question: should districts around the state be paying attention to this charter school debate that's happening in Indianapolis? Answer yes or no. Last week's question posed to viewers: should Indiana schools ban cell phones? 69% saying yes and 31% saying no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and for the poll. This week, Marion County Sheriff Carrie Forrestal announced a run for state senate next year, as other candidates consider campaigns leading into the midterm elections next year. Sarah Neal Estes reports Forrestal will vie for the seat in District 31 that represents parts of central Indiana.
That district is the northeast corner of Indianapolis and the Fishers area in Hamilton County, and it is a competitive district currently held by Republican Senator Kyle Walker. Walker recently made news as one of the Republicans openly opposed to redistricting. He announced he would not run again earlier this month. Forrestal is a Democrat and in his second term as sheriff. In that current role, he is term limited.
So as the 2026 campaign starts to heat up, will this be a race that Hoosiers should be watching?
Oh, I think so. It has a lot of the elements that would suggest it should be front burner. You'll have an open seat. That always, with no incumbent, that tends to bring a lot of people out who've maybe, been there thinking, if I ever had interest, well, now's the time. You also have a district that, and again, you can never say district because we'd redraw the districts every 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
So it still is. It still is. But that's a district that's never, as far as I know, had Democratic elected representation in that seat. So here you have a very legitimate candidate who has presumably high name ID and presumably will be well funded and could be a first for that district. And again, it's not as if everything happens in a static situation or in a vacuum. Districts themselves, even in the absence of new district lines, change. Yeah. Demographics change. You look at, I remember back when I was in kindergarten at IPS, this was rock solid. Marion County was a Republican territory, like Orange County, California. If you're a Republican, you got elected. The demographics change, the politics change, and we're seeing that now in that part of the suburban area up into Fishers and east of Carmel.
Yeah, we're seeing a more purple areas surrounding, the Indianapolis area. Carrie Forrestal is a pretty well-known name here in Indianapolis. Do you think this is a good choice for him?
Time will tell. I do think, to your point about what that district has looked like, when you look back at the election results, Republicans haven't won by a landslide in that district. The margins have been pretty close, so I think that creates an opportunity where a Democrat candidate with, the right storytelling, that name recognition certainly helps for people that maybe are not the most politically savvy. I do wonder, however, given some of the controversy that came up with ICE enforcement and how the sheriff's office was being utilized in those efforts, how that might fare in a district like this one where you have a very diverse population. So I wonder what role that might play. I also thought it was interesting. I went back. The late Sheriff Frank Anderson also ran in this district at one point in time as well.
Oh, really?
So,
that is interesting.
Pretty interesting.
I did want to bring up another race. There was some news surrounding Jennifer Ruth Green this week, and she will be running for District 1 next year, which is Frank Mervan's district, and a district that's been under a lot of attention and with the redistricting.
That's a nice way to put it, yes.
She'll be moving forward with her campaign in 2026 as well as things start to really get underway. Is this a race that we should be paying huge attention to?
I mean, especially in an off-year election, it's always a race. But I think Frank Mervan has represented that district extremely well for a substantial period of time and enjoys a tremendous amount of support. So I'm pretty optimistic we'll have Frank Mervan in Congress again.
When you talk about name ID, that goes multi-generational in terms of his
absolutely,
fathers.
the whole family. But I mean, he is down to earth. He's approachable. He represents his constituents. He does what he's supposed to do. His record is impeccable. Hers, maybe not so much.
Yeah, that name recognition has a little something to it.
You can go the other way.
Yeah.
But District 1, again, this race next year, a lot of lawmakers at the State House saying that, we should really focus on this race if this is how we want to, take control of these seats. Will this be one to watch next year?
We'll see. They put a lot of money into it last year or last cycle. Right. It was a priority for the NRCC, the National Republican Campaign Committee. Or Congressional Committee. It did move the needle, but not enough, not nearly enough. And at a time when Trump came in and won by 20 again, so it wasn't for lack of a good environment, which we're not likely to have in November of next year. So I think that's an uphill climb, maybe a little more so than it was before. But she was also the best candidate we had there ever, or a generation. As far as the Kyle Walker seat, Kyle is a guy who could That's a 1 or 2 point district favoring Republicans on your best day, and Kyle's always able to outperform that. I think Sheriff Forrestal is if Democrats have a pick of opportunity, it's this one, and so the Republicans have got to make sure we get the right person out of the primary. This cannot be a right wing fight or we're going to lose that seat.
It probably will be, though.
If there's a purple district in the state, it's that one.
Well, Indiana's only predominantly black institution will pause operations by the end of the year. Eric Weddle reports the school says it's facing financial challenges that it can no longer overcome.
Martin University was founded in 1977 on the east side of Indianapolis. But board chairman Joseph Perkins says declining enrollment and the lack of an endowment have made a pause in operations necessary. The move comes just weeks after the university's president resigned. Federal data highlights long-term struggles at the school, showing a graduation rate of just 15%. Officials say they are exploring options for the future, but they need donations to keep the school running through December.
You know, I do feel bad, Ebony, for the staff and the students, but is there any hope for Martin U?
I definitely think there's hope. I appreciate you mentioning about the staff and the students who are kind of without support in that way right now. One thing that I want to point out is that when you are a Black-led and Black-serving institution, what may feel as just a simple rain shower to someone else is a hurricane to you. Especially when you think about institutions of higher learning. Everybody deals with issues of retention, funding, how to make sure this thing is sustainable over time, governance. But in this case, this is an institution that has just not had that long-term support. Without that long-term financial support, sustainable, a strong board, I mean, I think the future is pretty grim without those things. So I just want to be very deliberate about that point.
Yeah, I'm actually, we're out of time. That is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel has been Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Ebony Chappel, Director of Brand and Community Strategy at Free Press Indiana. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Jill Sheridan, Managing Editor at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.